The coffee shop glowed warm against the December night frost creeping across the windows in delicate patterns that caught the colored lights strung along the ceiling. Vivienne Caldwell sat with her back straight, her hands folded around a cup that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago. The man across from her adjusted his Rolex for the third time since they'd sat down, his eyes drifting past her shoulder toward the door like he was already planning his exit. Richard Sterling was older than her by 12 years, with silver threading through hair that had been professionally styled earlier that evening. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, and he'd been talking for 25 minutes straight about his real estate empire without once asking her a single question. Vivian watched the way his mouth moved, forming words about property acquisitions in Denver and development deals in Phoenix, and felt the familiar numbness settling into her chest. This was the fourth setup her mother had arranged in 6 months. Each time Vivian told herself she'd say no. Each time when Constance called with that particular tone of hope and desperation blended together, Vivian heard herself agreeing. The grindhouse had been Richard's choice. Downtown Chicago decorated with white lights and garland for Christmas soft jazz playing from speakers mounted in corners that had been there since the 90s. Outside snow fell in thin, uneven flakes, catching the glow from streetlights and the headlights of cars crawling past on slick pavement. The weather forecast had called for 3 to 5 inches by morning. Vivian was 46 years old. She ran a tech company that employed 320 people. She made decisions every day that affected budgets in the millions that determined whether projects succeeded or failed, whether investors stayed or walked. But when her mother called with that voice, the one that carried 8 years of worry, wrapped in forced optimism, Vivian still found herself sitting across from strangers who looked at her like a box that didn't quite check the right specifications. Richard leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. The gesture reminded Vivian of her ex-husband, of the way Jonathan used to signal he was about to say something. He'd rehearse something he believed was kind but necessary. Richard's voice didn't change pitch. He could have been commenting on the weather or the quality of the coffee when the words came out. I've been married twice, both times to women who could give me children. At my age, Constance assured me you understood that family legacy matters. Vivian's fingers tightened around the ceramic cup. The surface felt solid under her palms, anchoring her to something real, while the rest of the world tilted slightly off its axis. Most men want someone who can still, well, you understand. The pause hung between them like smoke. Vivian didn't move, didn't blink, just held the cup and stared at the dark surface of her coffee, at the faint ring of dried foam clinging to the edge where she'd taken her last sip. She had heard worse before. She had heard it from Jonathan, though he'd been gentler about it, had couched it in language about biological realities and windows closing, and being sorry, so sorry, but he'd always wanted to be a father. Jonathan had filed for divorce on a Tuesday. Vivian remembered because she'd just returned from a conference in Boston, was unpacking her suitcase, when he came into the bedroom they'd painted blue together one summer, and told her he'd met someone younger, someone who could give him what Vivian couldn't. That had been 8 years ago. 8 years of rebuilding herself from the ground up, of pouring every ounce of energy into Tech Vanguard, of telling herself she didn't need anyone else, didn't want anyone else. 8 years of her mother calling with new introductions, new possibilities, new men who all eventually circled back to the same conclusion. Vivian Caldwell was accomplished, successful, intelligent. But she was also 46, divorced, and unable to have children. The math never worked in her favor. Richard was scrolling through his phone, now already losing interest in the conversation he had started. Vivian opened her mouth to say something. The polite exit she'd perfected over the past 2 years, the smooth deflection that would let them both leave with dignity intact. But before she could form the words, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. Someone was walking toward their table. Marcus Holloway had been sitting in the corner of the grindhouse for the past 90 minutes. His laptop glowed in front of him, lines of code scrolling across the screen, but he hadn't actually looked at the work in over half an hour. He'd been watching instead. Watching Vivian Caldwell sit across from a man who clearly didn't see her, didn't value her, didn't recognize that the woman in front of him was extraordinary. Marcus knew who Vivian was. Everyone at Sentinel knew. She was the CEO of Tech Vanguard, the client they'd been working with for 3 months on the cloud-safe integration project. She ran board meetings with precision that bordered on surgical. She made decisions fast and expected results faster. People respected her. Some were intimidated by her. Marcus had only spoken to her a handful of times, usually during project calls or brief encounters in the hallway outside the conference room Tech Vanguard had assigned to Sentinel's team. But he'd noticed her. Had been noticing her since the first video call in September, when she'd arrived exactly 3 minutes early, and had listened to their security proposal with focus so intense Marcus felt like she was reading the code directly from his mind. He'd noticed the way she drank her coffee, black, no sugar, no cream. The way she hated corporate buzzwords and would cut through jargon to get to the actual substance of what someone was trying to say. 3 weeks ago, when the CloudSafe demo had crashed during a board presentation, Vivian had taken full responsibility, even though the error had been Marcus's team's fault. She'd stood in front of her board and said the words, "I should have caught this during testing," when everyone in that room knew she'd never touched the code. That was the moment Marcus had stopped trying to convince himself his interest was purely professional. Now he watched a man who'd spent the evening talking about himself tell Vivian Caldwell she was too old. Watched her fingers tighten around her coffee cup. Watched her shoulders stiffen, even as her face remained perfectly composed. Marcus closed his laptop, stood up, walked toward their table with his heart hammering against his ribs and his mind screaming that this was inappropriate, unprofessional, crossing every boundary that existed between consultant and client. But he couldn't watch this anymore. Couldn't sit in his corner and pretend he didn't see what was happening. Vivian heard footsteps approaching but didn't look up. She assumed it was the barista or someone passing by on their way to the restroom. Then a hand appeared in her line of vision, strong fingers gripping the edge of her table, and she heard a voice she recognized from 3 months of project calls. "Ms. Caldwell," Marcus's voice carried across the small space with quiet authority. Vivian looked up, found him standing beside the table with his laptop bag slung over one shoulder and an expression on his face that was professionally neutral, but somehow urgent underneath. "I'm sorry to interrupt." Richard looked up from his phone, irritation flickering across his features. Marcus didn't glance at him. Kept his eyes locked on Vivian. "I just got an alert from the CloudSafe system. We have a situation. I need your authorization to proceed." Vivian's mind went blank for half a second, then snapped into focus. There hadn't been any alerts. She'd checked her phone 15 minutes ago, had the monitoring dashboard app open in the background. Everything had been green, stable, running smooth. But Marcus was looking at her with eyes that said, "Please trust me, just this once," and Vivian made a decision. "What kind of situation?" Marcus shifted his laptop bag, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out his phone. Pulled up a screen that showed lines of code Vivian couldn't read from where she sat, but that looked plausible enough if you weren't looking closely. Firewall detected a SQL injection attempt from an IP address in Russia. Multiple attempts on the authentication layer. "I've got the intrusion contained, but I need to patch the vulnerability before they find another vector." Richard set his phone down on the table with more force than necessary. "This seems like something that could wait until business hours." Marcus finally looked at him. The expression on his face was polite, professional, and absolutely immovable. "Cybersecurity doesn't wait for business hours, sir. Attackers know that. They count on it." Richard's jaw tightened. He looked at Vivian. "We haven't finished our conversation." Vivian stood up, reaching for her coat draped over the back of her chair. The movement felt like stepping through a door she'd been standing in front of for years, finally choosing to cross the threshold instead of turning back. "I think we have, actually." She pulled on her coat, a black wool blend that cost more than Richard's suit and fit her like it had been made specifically for her body because it had. Marcus stepped back to give her room, kept his eyes on Richard like he was waiting for an objection. Richard stood as well, grabbed his own coat with movements that were sharp, clipped, controlled anger wrapped in expensive fabric. "Your mother will hear about this. She arranged this meeting in good faith." Vivian buttoned her coat with steady hands. "My mother arranged this meeting because she's terrified of me dying alone. But I'd rather be alone than spend another minute with someone who sees me as a compromise." The words came out colder than she'd intended. Richard's face flushed. He opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he turned and walked toward the door, shouldering past Marcus without another word. The bell above the entrance chimed as he left, and then the coffee shop was quieter, the jazz music filling the space his presence had occupied. Vivian stood by the table, her coat buttoned, her purse in her hand, and looked at Marcus Holloway for the first time without the buffer of professional distance between them. "There's no security breach, is there?" Marcus had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. He slipped his phone back into his pocket. "No, ma'am, but SQL injection is a real threat, and I wasn't lying about the methodology." Vivian felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, just shifting. The careful architecture she'd built around herself adjusting to accommodate this unexpected variable. "Why did you do that?" Marcus met her eyes. His were blue, she noticed. Dark blue like deep water in winter. "Because I know what it's like to be measured against an impossible standard and found lacking. And I know you're better than whatever that man thinks you are." The honesty in his voice was almost painful. Vivian wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't know anything about her, that 3 months of project calls didn't give him the right to make judgments about her life. But the words wouldn't form because he was looking at her like she was someone worth defending, and it had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way. The barista appeared beside their table, young, apologetic, clearly wanting to close up for the night, but too polite to rush them. "Sorry, folks, but we're closing in about 10 minutes. Marcus nodded, stepped back from the table. "No problem. We were just leaving." He looked at Vivian and she saw the question in his expression. The unspoken asking if she was okay, if she needed anything, if she wanted him to leave her alone or stay, or something in between. Vivian made another decision, one that felt reckless and necessary in equal measure. "Do you have somewhere you need to be, or could you stay just for a few minutes?" Relief flickered across Marcus's face, brief but unmistakable. He gestured to the chair Richard had vacated. "May I?" Vivian nodded, sat back down, unbuttoned her coat, but didn't take it off, like she was keeping one foot in the door marked exit, just in case this turned into another mistake. Marcus set his laptop bag on the floor beside the chair, sat down with the careful movements of someone who knew he was on uncertain ground. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The jazz music shifted to something slower, more melancholic. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now, accumulating on the sidewalks and parked cars in soft white layers. Vivian looked at the man across from her, really looked at him. She'd seen him in passing at Tech Vanguard's offices, had been on video calls where he'd presented security protocols and system architectures. But she'd never noticed the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried tension, even when he tried to relax the faint scar above his left eyebrow that suggested a story she didn't know. That was a professional excuse. The security breach. Marcus didn't deny it. "It was the first thing I could think of that would sound legitimate. But you are good at your job, the actual security work." Something like pride touched Marcus's expression. "I am. Taught myself everything I know. YouTube, Stack Overflow, 10,000 hours of making mistakes and figuring out why things broke." "No formal training." Marcus shook his head. "Dropped out of college after a year. Couldn't afford it, didn't see the point in racking up debt for information I could learn for free if I was willing to put in the work." Vivian had 2 degrees, a bachelor's in computer science from Northwestern and an MBA from Kellogg. She'd spent 6 years in school and $140,000 building the credentials that had opened doors for her. But she'd worked with enough people who had impressive degrees and no practical skills to know that the paper didn't always match the ability. "Your team fixed a vulnerability in our authentication system that our internal IT department missed. They have 3 MIT graduates." Marcus's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Degrees teach theory. Real-world threats teach survival. I'd take 10,000 hours in the field over a PhD any day." The conviction in his voice reminded Vivian of why she'd hired Sentinel in the first place. Their team was small, scrappy, composed of people who'd come up through non-traditional paths. But they were the best at what they did because they understood that security wasn't about following protocols. It was about thinking like the people trying to break in. "How long have you been doing this work?" 15 years. Started when I was 29, fresh out of a marriage that was already failing and looking for something to prove I was worth something." The admission hung between them. Vivian recognized the shape of it, the way pain could drive people toward achievement as a form of validation. "Did it work? Did you prove it?" Marcus considered the question. "I proved I could build something, that I could be good at something, and whether that translated to being worth something, He trailed off, shrugged, still figuring that part out. Vivian knew that feeling, knew what it was like to build an empire and still wake up feeling hollow. You said you know what it's like to be measured and found lacking. What standard were you measured against? Marcus looked down at his hands at the place where a wedding ring used to be. The skin there was still slightly lighter than the rest, a pale band that hadn't fully faded even after 3 years. Being a good husband, being a good father, being present for the people who needed me instead of drowning myself in work because I was too scared to face what was actually falling apart. The honesty was brutal. Vivian felt herself leaning forward slightly, drawn in by the rawness of it. You have a child. Lily, she's 7, lives with me 90% of the time. Her mother, my ex-wife, moved to Seattle 3 years ago. Fresh start, new life, new husband. Marcus's voice was carefully neutral, but Vivian heard the edges underneath. She sees Lily once a month, sometimes less. Vivian thought about the kind of pain that would make a mother leave her child, thought about the different ways people broke the different shapes their fractures took. That must be hard. It is, but Lily's the best thing I've ever done. The only thing I know I got right. When there was something in the way he said it that made Vivian's throat tighten. A certainty, a bedrock foundation underneath all the doubt and self-recrimination. This man who questioned his worth as a husband, who carried the weight of a failed marriage like stones in his pockets, had no doubt about his value as a father. Vivian wanted to ask more about Lily, about what it was like to raise a daughter alone, about how he managed the logistics of work and school and all the small disasters that came with parenting. But asking those questions felt like stepping too close to the edge of a cliff she'd been avoiding for 8 years. Instead, she heard herself saying something she hadn't planned to say. The man you just rescued me from. Richard Sterling. My mother set up that meeting. She's been doing this for 2 years now, arranging dates with men she thinks are suitable, men who are financially stable, professionally successful, emotionally available. Vivian's voice was flat, reciting facts like, they didn't cost her anything. She means well. She's terrified of me being alone, but she doesn't understand that some things can't be fixed by trying harder. Marcus waited, didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes, just listened with the kind of attention that felt almost physical, like he was catching every word and holding it carefully. I was married for 12 years to Jonathan Pierce. He's a cardiac surgeon. We met when I was 31, married at 33, and spent the next 7 years trying to have children. The words came easier than Vivian expected. Maybe because Marcus was essentially a stranger. Maybe because the coffee shop was nearly empty, and the snow outside created a sense of being suspended in time, separate from the rest of the world. We tried everything. IVF 3 rounds, hormone treatments. I spent 2 years getting injections every day, tracking my cycle timing, everything perfectly. We spent over $100,000, saw 6 different specialists, and nothing worked. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. Jonathan was kind about it for a while. He said it didn't matter that we could adopt, that we had other options. But I could see it changing him. The way he looked at me, the way he stopped talking about the future, the way he started working later, traveling more, finding reasons to not be home. Vivian picked up her coffee cup, realized it was empty, set it back down. He asked for the divorce on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just gotten back from a conference in Boston, was unpacking my suitcase when he came into our bedroom and told me he'd met someone, a nurse at the hospital, 29 years old. He said he was sorry, but he couldn't give up on being a father. He said he hoped I understood. The memory was clearer than Vivian wanted it to be. She could see the bedroom, the blue walls they'd painted together one summer, when they'd still believed in futures and forever. Could see the suitcase open on the bed, her hands holding a folded blouse. Could see Jonathan's face, apologetic, but resolute, already halfway out the door, even as he stood in front of her. He used the word forgive, said he forgave me for not being able to give him children. Like it was a moral failing. Like I'd chosen this. Like my body's inability to do the one thing it was supposedly designed to do was something I needed to be absolved of. Marcus's hands tightened on the edge of the table. Vivian noticed, wondered what he was feeling, what memories her story was triggering in him. I didn't fight the divorce, signed the papers, sold the house, started over, built Tech Vanguard from the ground up, told myself I was fine, better than fine. I didn't need anyone, didn't want anyone. Work was enough. But your mother doesn't see it that way. Vivian shook her head. She sees a daughter who's running out of time, who's choosing work over family, who's going to end up alone because she's too stubborn to compromise. Is that what you think, that you're too stubborn? Vivian considered the question, turned it over in her mind like a stone, examining the edges. No, I think I'm too tired. Too tired to pretend I'm something I'm not. Too tired to sit through dinners with men who look at me like I'm damaged goods. Too tired to keep hoping that maybe this time will be different. The words came out heavier than she'd intended. She felt the weight of them settling in her chest, felt the ache that had been living there for 8 years, constant and dull and familiar. She looked away, suddenly embarrassed that she'd said so much to someone she barely knew in a coffee shop on Christmas Eve. But Marcus didn't look uncomfortable, didn't pull back or change the subject. He just nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what she meant. I know that feeling, that exhaustion. I spent 3 years after my divorce convinced I'd failed at the most important thing a person can do. Failed at building a family, at being present, at choosing the people I loved over the work that made me feel valuable. He paused, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. My ex-wife, Natasha, we were married for 9 years. Had Lily when I was 37. Everything seemed fine. Or maybe I just wasn't paying attention to the things that weren't. Marcus looked at his hands again, at that pale band of skin. I was working 70-hour weeks, trying to make a name for myself in the cybersecurity field, trying to prove that I could build something significant without the credentials everyone else had. I missed Lily's first words, her first steps, her kindergarten graduation. I was always at the office, always on a deadline, always convincing myself that the next project would be the one that finally proved I was enough. And Natasha, she wanted more than I could give, more time, more attention, more of me. But I was so focused on building my career that I couldn't see what was falling apart right in front of me. Marcus's voice was steady, but Vivian heard the cost underneath. She met someone else, her boss at the marketing firm where she worked. He was there, present, paying attention to her in ways I wasn't. She asked for a divorce, said she couldn't be the mother Lily deserved if she was that angry all the time, said Seattle was a fresh start. And Lily stayed with me. Natasha said she needed to figure herself out before she could be a good parent. I resented her for it, but maybe she was right. Maybe recognizing your limitations and stepping back is braver than staying and slowly poisoning everything with resentment. Vivian thought about Jonathan, about whether he'd been brave or cowardly when he'd chosen to leave, rather than stay in a marriage that couldn't give him what he wanted. The barista appeared again, this time more insistent. Really sorry, but I need to start closing up. We're supposed to be out by 10:30. Marcus checked his watch, looked surprised. We've been talking for almost an hour. Vivian felt surprised too. Time had compressed, expanded, become something fluid and unmeasured. She stood gathering her purse, buttoning her coat fully this time. Marcus stood as well, slinging his laptop bag over his shoulder. They walked to the door together. The barista held it open, thanked them for coming, wished them a Merry Christmas. The cold air hit Vivian's face like a slap, sharp and immediate. The snow was falling heavier, now thick flakes that caught in her hair and melted against her skin. The street was quieter than it had been when she'd arrived. Most of the shops closed, Christmas lights reflecting off the fresh snow in pools of red and green and gold. Marcus stood beside her on the sidewalk. They were the only two people visible in any direction, the city muffled and softened by the falling snow. Where are you parked? Vivian pointed down the block, the dark sedan, about halfway down. Marcus nodded, started to say something, stopped, looked across the street instead. Vivian followed his gaze, saw the Walgreens on the corner, lights still on, inside the 24-hour sign glowing blue in the window. Wait here, just 1 second. He crossed the street before Vivian could ask why, his figure becoming indistinct in the falling snow. She watched him disappear through the automatic doors, stood on the sidewalk with snow accumulating on her shoulders, and wondered what she was doing, why she was still here, why she hadn't just gotten in her car and driven away. Marcus reappeared 2 minutes later, jogging back across the street with something in his hand. A single white rose, the petals perfect and unblemished, wrapped in clear cellophane. He stopped in front of her, slightly out of breath. This is going to sound insane. Vivian waited. I've been thinking about you for 3 months. Every time we're on a project call, every time you walk past my desk at Tech Vanguard, I kept telling myself it was inappropriate because you're a client, that I needed to keep it professional. The rose was still in his hand, held between them like an offering. But tonight, watching that man tear you down, watching you sit there and take it because you're so tired of fighting, I realized that inappropriate or not, I couldn't let you think you're anything less than extraordinary. He held out the rose. Vivian took it, her fingers brushing against his, for just a moment, felt the warmth of his hand against the cold air. Women like you don't need someone who's good enough. You need someone brave enough to be worthy of you. The words settled into Vivian's chest, took root somewhere deep. She looked at the rose, at its perfect white petals, at the way it caught the light from the street lamp above them. Looked back at Marcus, at this man who'd intervened in her disastrous date, who'd sat with her for an hour listening to the story of her failed marriage, who'd crossed the street in a snowstorm to buy her a flower. Marcus, you don't even know me. Then let me. No pressure, no expectations. Just coffee sometime. Real coffee, not a project meeting. Vivian felt herself standing at another threshold. The safe choice would be to thank him. Get in her car, go home to her empty penthouse, and forget this ever happened. Return to the careful routine she'd built, the walls that kept her protected and alone. But the rose was in her hand, and Marcus was looking at her with eyes that saw her, really saw her, and Vivian was so tired of being safe. I can't. I'm your client. This would be, Marcus's expression shifted, became something determined. The Cloud Safe project ends Friday. Contract's up. I won't be your consultant anymore. Silence stretched between them. Snow fell. Christmas lights blinked their steady rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn sounded muffled by the storm. Vivian took a breath. Ask me again on Friday. Marcus smiled. Not a big smile, just a slight curve of his mouth, but it reached his eyes, made them warmer. Deal. They stood there for another moment, neither quite ready to leave. Then Vivian turned toward her car. Marcus fell into step beside her without being asked. They didn't speak, just walked together through the falling snow, their footsteps leaving tracks in the fresh accumulation. At her car, Vivian unlocked the door but didn't get in immediately. Marcus stood a few feet away, giving her space. Thank you. For tonight. For everything. Marcus shook his head. You don't have to thank me. I do. You didn't have to do what you did, but you did anyway. That means something. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back, lifted one hand in a small wave. Drive safe. The roads are going to be bad. Vivian got into the car, set the rose carefully on the passenger seat, started the engine. The heater kicked on, blowing cold air that would warm eventually. In the rearview mirror, she could see Marcus standing on the sidewalk watching her go. Not walking away yet, just standing there in the snow under the Christmas lights, like he needed to make sure she got away safely. Vivian pulled away from the curb, drove slowly down the snow-covered street. At the corner, she turned and Marcus disappeared from view. But the image stayed with her, burned into memory. A single moment of kindness on a night when she'd expected nothing but the same old pain. The city looked different as she drove through it, softer somehow. The snow had covered the rough edges, made everything look clean and new. She glanced at the rose on the passenger seat, at its perfect white petals, at the way it seemed to glow in the dim light from the dashboard. Vivian thought about Marcus's words, about being extraordinary, about needing someone brave enough to be worthy rather than just good enough. Thought about the way he'd looked at her like she was someone worth defending. She thought about how long it had been since anyone had looked at her that way. How long since someone had seen past the CEO, past the divorce, past the careful armor she wore to get through each day. 8 years. 8 years of telling herself she was fine alone. 8 years of building walls and calling it strength. But tonight, standing in the snow with a white rose in her hand, Vivian had felt something crack. Not break, just shift. The architecture adjusting to accommodate possibility. Her phone buzzed in her purse. Vivian ignored it. Knew without looking that it would be her mother calling to ask how the date went, to tell her not to be picky, to remind her that time was running out. The phone buzzed again, and again, 7 times before it finally stopped. Vivian drove through the quiet streets, past the holiday decorations and storefront windows, past the few people still out bundled against the cold, hurrying toward whatever warmth waited for them. She thought about going home to her empty penthouse, to the silence that would stretch through the weekend, to the routine that kept her safe but left her hollow. But she also thought about Friday, about Marcus asking her again, about the possibility of saying yes. The parking garage under her building was nearly empty. Vivian pulled into her assigned spot, turned off the engine, sat in the silence for a moment. The rose rested on the passenger seat beside her purse. She picked it up, held it gently, brought it close enough to catch the faint, sweet scent. Then she got out of the car, took the elevator up to the 45th floor, unlocked her apartment door, and stepped inside. The penthouse was dark. Vivian turned on a light, found a crystal vase in the kitchen cabinet, filled it with water, placed the rose inside, set it on the counter where she would see it every morning when she made coffee. Stepped back and looked at it, at the way it stood tall and beautiful in the simple glass, at the way it transformed the space around it just by being there. Her phone was still in her purse. Vivian pulled it out, looked at the 7 missed calls from her mother, the text messages that had accumulated. How did it go? Call me when you get home. Vivian, don't be difficult. You are not getting any younger. Vivian set the phone face down on the counter. Didn't respond. Not yet. Maybe not tonight at all. Instead, she stood in her kitchen with snow still melting in her hair and looked at the white rose Marcus had given her. Thought about the way he'd crossed the street in a snowstorm to bring her something beautiful. Thought about the way he'd listened to her story without flinching, without offering empty comfort, just accepting the truth of who she was. Her phone buzzed again. Not her mother this time. A new number. Vivian picked it up, read the message. Forgot to mention I lied earlier. There are revised specs for Monday. I just wanted an excuse to check on you. Sleep well, Vivian. Vivian smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes and made her face feel warm. She typed a response. Thank you for tonight, for the flower, for everything. I'm glad you were there. She sent it, watched the message deliver, set her phone down on the counter beside the rose, changed into comfortable clothes, made herself a cup of tea, sat on the couch and looked out the window at the snow still falling over the city. The Christmas lights on the building across the street blinked in steady rhythm, red, green, gold, over and over. Vivian sipped her tea and let herself feel it all. The sadness of the year she'd lost, the fear of what might come, but also the gratitude for what had happened tonight, for Marcus's kindness, for his honesty, for his willingness to see her as something more than damaged or incomplete. Her phone buzzed one more time. She picked it up. You don't have to thank me, but I'm glad I was there too. Sleep well, Vivian. Vivian read it twice, set the phone down, finished her tea, turned off the lights, went to bed. And for the first time in 8 years, she fell asleep believing that maybe she wasn't too old for love. Maybe she was just waiting for someone mature enough to see her value. Someone like Marcus. Someone who looked at her and saw exactly what she was. Not perfect despite her flaws, but extraordinary because she was real and honest and strong enough to keep going even when the world told her to give up. The snow continued falling outside her window. The city slept under a blanket of white. And somewhere across town, Marcus Holloway stood in his own apartment, looking at his phone, hoping he'd done the right thing, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something worth believing in. For both of them, the night ended not with certainty but with possibility. Monday morning arrived with weak winter sunlight filtering through cloud cover that promised more snow by evening. Vivian stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 6:15, applying makeup with the precision of someone who'd turned morning routines into meditation. The white rose sat in its vase on her kitchen counter, visible through the open doorway, petals still fresh. She'd slept better than she had in months. The realization unsettled her more than it should have. One conversation with a man she barely knew shouldn't have made that much difference. But when she'd woken at 5:30, her first thought, it hadn't been about the quarterly projections due Tuesday or the infrastructure audit scheduled for January. Her first thought had been about Friday, about Marcus asking her to coffee, about the possibilities she'd allowed herself to consider. Vivian finished her makeup, pulled her hair into a French twist, put on a navy suit that cost $3,000, and made her look exactly like what she was, a woman who commanded rooms without raising her voice. She checked her phone. One text from her mother sent at 11:43 the previous night. "We need to talk." Vivian deleted it without responding, grabbed her briefcase, her coat, her keys, took one last look at the rose before leaving like it was proof that Friday night had actually happened, that she hadn't imagined the entire thing. The drive to Tech Vanguard's offices took 35 minutes in morning traffic. Vivian listened to NPR without really hearing it, her mind already running through the day's schedule. Department heads meeting at 9, call with the legal team at 10:30 about the patent filing, lunch with potential investors at noon, the CloudSafe deployment review at 2, which meant Marcus would be there, which meant she'd have to sit across a conference table from him and pretend the previous night hadn't happened. She parked in her reserved spot, took the elevator to the 8th floor, walked through the lobby where her assistant was already at her desk, despite it being 7:20 in the morning. Carla looked up from her computer screen, and something in her expression shifted, just slightly, a flicker of surprise, maybe recognition. "Good morning, you're in early." Vivian set her briefcase on Carla's desk while she shrugged out of her coat. "Always am on Mondays." "I know, but you seem different today." Vivian handed Carla her coat. Different how? Carla hung the coat on the rack behind her desk, turned back with a thoughtful expression. "Lighter, maybe, like something good happened over the weekend." Vivian felt heat creep up her neck, forced it back down with practiced control. "Just a productive weekend. Is the conference room ready for the 9 o'clock?" "All set, coffee's brewing, and the Sentinel team is already here. They've been in conference room B since 7. Of course they were. Marcus would want to make sure everything was perfect for the deployment review. Would want to prove that his team's work was flawless before the contract ended on Friday. Vivian walked to her office, closed the door, stood at the window overlooking downtown Chicago. The city spread out below her, steel and glass and concrete, all of it covered in a thin layer of white from the weekend snow. She could see the lake in the distance, gray water meeting gray sky at a horizon that looked smudged, indistinct. Her phone buzzed. Not a text this time. An email from Marcus. Subject line, Monday Specs Review. Vivian opened it. "Good morning. Attached are the revised security protocols we discussed. Also wanted to let you know we found a potential vulnerability in the backup authentication system over the weekend. Nothing critical but worth addressing before go live. Can we add 15 minutes to this afternoon's review? Professional, appropriate. Exactly what an email from a consultant to a client should be. But Vivian read it 3 times anyway, looking for something underneath the words, some acknowledgement of what had passed between them on a snowy sidewalk outside a coffee shop. She typed a response. 15 minutes is fine. Thank you for catching the vulnerability. VC. Sent it. Stared at her screen, deleted the email from her inbox so she wouldn't be tempted to read it again. The 9 o'clock meeting stretched to 9:45. The legal team call got rescheduled twice. Lunch with investors ran long because they wanted to discuss expansion into the European market, which meant regulatory compliance issues Vivian wasn't prepared to address without doing more research first. By the time she made it back to her office at 1:50, she had a headache starting behind her right eye and 10 minutes to review the deployment documentation before the CloudSafe meeting. Carla intercepted her in the hallway. "Your mother called 3 times. She sounds upset. Tell her I'm in meetings all afternoon." "I did. She said she'd keep calling until you answered." Vivian pushed open her office door, dropped her briefcase on the desk harder than necessary, then put her through to voicemail. Carla didn't move from the doorway. "Vivian, I've worked for you for 6 years. I've never seen your mother this persistent. Whatever happened this weekend is none of her business or yours." The words came out sharper than intended. Carla's expression closed down, professional mask sliding into place. "Understood. The Sentinel team is waiting in conference room B." She left before Vivian could apologize. Vivian stood in her office surrounded by diplomas and awards and framed patents and felt like the worst version of herself. Snapping at Carla, who'd never been anything but loyal and competent and kind. Avoiding her mother, who was probably genuinely worried. Running from everything that felt remotely personal because personal meant vulnerable, and vulnerable meant the possibility of being hurt again. The white rose was still on her kitchen counter at home. Vivian wondered if it would still be alive by Friday, or if it would wilt before she had the chance to see Marcus again, before she could decide whether to say yes or no, or something in between. Conference Room B was at the end of the hall, windows overlooking the parking lot, walls lined with whiteboards covered in network diagrams and security protocols. Marcus's team was already there, 3 developers, 1 systems architect, and Marcus himself standing at the head of the table with a laptop open in front of him. He looked up when Vivian entered. Their eyes met for maybe 2 seconds. Something passed between them, some acknowledgement too subtle for anyone else to catch, and then Marcus was all business again, gesturing to the empty chair at the other end of the table. "We're ready when you are." Vivian sat, pulled out her own laptop, opened the deployment documentation. "Walk me through the vulnerability you found." Marcus pulled up a screen, displayed it on the projector so everyone could see. Lines of code in white text against a black background, annotations in red, highlighting specific functions. The backup authentication system has a race condition in the token validation sequence. Under normal circumstances, it's not exploitable. But if an attacker can generate enough simultaneous requests, they might be able to slip through during the microsecond gap between token generation and validation. One of Vivian's IT directors, a man who'd graduated from MIT 3 years ago with perfect grades and no practical experience, leaned forward. "How did you identify this? Our internal security audit didn't flag anything." Marcus didn't look at him, kept his eyes on the code. "Because internal audits test for known vulnerabilities. I test for what attackers might try. I spent Saturday running 10,000 simultaneous authentication requests against the system to see what would break. And it broke on attempt 7,243. Window lasted for 0.03 seconds. Long enough." The room was quiet. The MIT director sat back in his chair. "How do we fix it?" Marcus pulled up another screen, this one showing modified code. "I wrote a patch, adds an additional validation layer that closes the gap. It'll add approximately 15 milliseconds to authentication time, which is negligible for user experience, but eliminates the vulnerability." Vivian studied the code. She wasn't a developer anymore, hadn't written production code in 8 years. But she'd built her company on the foundation of understanding technology at a fundamental level of being able to recognize quality work when she saw it. Marcus's patch was elegant, clean, the kind of solution that came from someone who understood not just how systems worked, but how attackers thought. "How long to implement?" "If we start tomorrow, we can have it deployed by Thursday, Friday morning at the latest." Friday, the last day of the contract, the day Marcus would ask her again. Vivian made a decision. "Do it. Whatever resources you need from our team, you have them." Marcus nodded, started to say something else, stopped when Vivian's phone buzzed on the table in front of her. She glanced at the screen. Her mother. Again. Vivian sent it to voicemail, looked up to find Marcus watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or recognition of someone avoiding something they didn't want to deal with. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes. Technical discussions about encryption protocols and firewall configurations, things that should have had Vivian's full attention, but instead felt like background noise to the awareness of Marcus, sitting 20 feet away, of the careful distance they were both maintaining, of Friday looming on the horizon like a question neither of them had answered yet. When the meeting finally ended, Vivian gathered her things quickly. Marcus was packing up his laptop, giving instructions to his team about the patch implementation. Their eyes met again as Vivian headed for the door. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but there were too many people around, too many witnesses to whatever this was between them. Vivian left without saying anything beyond professional pleasantries. Walked back to her office, closed the door, stood at the window and watched the winter afternoon fade toward evening. Watched snow start to fall again, lighter than the weekend storm, but steady, persistent. Her phone rang. Her mother, for the 7th time that day. Vivian answered. "I'm busy." Her mother's voice came through, sharp-clipped, barely containing anger underneath forced calm. "Too busy to explain why Richard Sterling called me yesterday morning to tell me my daughter embarrassed him. Too busy to return my calls. Too busy to show basic respect." Vivian closed her eyes, counted to 5, opened them again. Richard was inappropriate. The evening was over. I left. With some man who claimed there was a work emergency. On a Saturday night, during Christmas. Don't insult my intelligence, Vivian. The use of her full name instead of a nickname was her mother's tell. Constance Caldwell was past worried, past concerned, deep into the territory of hurt feelings and maternal disappointment. His name is Marcus Holloway. He's a security consultant working on the CloudSafe project. There was an issue that needed my attention. Richard said he looked at you like you were the only person in the room. Vivian's breath caught. Her mother's voice had changed, gone from anger to something else. Something that sounded almost like hope. Mom, I'm coming over. Tomorrow morning, we need to talk. I have meetings all day. Then I'll be there at 7, before your meetings. The line went dead. Vivian stared at her phone at the call duration displayed on the screen. 2 minutes and 18 seconds. Long enough for her mother to get in the last word to set the terms to make it clear that this conversation was happening whether Vivian wanted it or not. She texted Carla, "Clear my calendar until 9 tomorrow morning. Personal matter." The response came back immediately. "Done. Everything okay?" Vivian didn't answer, put her phone face down on her desk, tried to focus on work for the next 3 hours and failed spectacularly. By 6:30, she gave up, packed her briefcase, went home to her empty penthouse. The white rose was still fresh. Vivian changed its water-touched one petal, gently wondered what Marcus was doing right now. Whether he was thinking about Friday. Whether he was having second thoughts about getting involved with a client, about crossing professional boundaries for someone who came with 8 years of emotional baggage and a mother who called 7 times in one day. She made herself dinner, worked for 2 more hours, went to bed at 10, and lay awake until after midnight, thinking about everything and nothing about the spaces between what she wanted and what she believed was possible. Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold. Vivian woke at 5:30, made coffee, stood in her kitchen in her bathrobe, and stared at the rose while she waited for the inevitable. The doorbell rang at 6:58. Constance Caldwell stood in the hallway holding 2 paper bags from the bakery, 3 blocks from Vivian's building. She was 68 years old with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and the kind of posture that came from decades of carrying a responsibility without complaint. She wore a burgundy coat Vivian had given her last Christmas and leather gloves that matched, and her eyes were the same blue-green as Vivian's own. "You going to let me in or make me stand in the hall like a stranger?" Vivian stepped aside. Her mother walked past her into the penthouse, set the bags on the kitchen counter, pulled out containers of food. Scones, muffins, croissants, enough for a family of 6. "I haven't eaten yet. Thought we could have breakfast while we talk." Vivian poured coffee into 2 mugs, handed one to her mother, watched as Constance added cream and sugar with practiced movements. They'd had breakfast together like this 1,000 times over the years. After Vivian's father died, after the divorce, after bad days and good days and all the ordinary days in between. But this felt different, charged, like they were both bracing for impact. Constance sat at the breakfast bar, wrapped her hands around her mug. "Tell me about Marcus Holloway." "There's nothing to tell. He's a consultant. The project ends Friday." "And then what?" Vivian picked at a scone, pulled off a piece, didn't eat it. "I don't know. But you want there to be something after Friday." It wasn't a question. Vivian looked at her mother, at the woman who'd raised her alone after her father's heart attack when Vivian was 16, who'd worked 2 jobs to put her through Northwestern, who'd held her when Jonathan asked for a divorce, and never once said, "I told you so," even though she'd had doubts about the marriage from the beginning. Maybe. I don't know. It's complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. Constance set her mug down, leaned forward with both elbows on the counter. "Richard called me Sunday morning. Said you humiliated him, that some man interrupted your date and dragged you away with a fabricated work emergency. He was angry, insulted. Wanted me to know that you'd sabotaged your last chance at finding someone appropriate." Vivian felt anger spike hot in her chest. "Richard spent the evening telling me I was too old to give any man what he wanted. He made it clear I was a waste of his time. If that's appropriate, I want no part of it." "I know." The words were quiet, but they stopped Vivian cold. "You know," Constance picked up her coffee again, took a long sip. "Richard called me before he met you, asked very specifically about whether you could still have children. I told him no, told him about the fertility treatments, the IVF failures, all of it. He said he appreciated the honesty, that he'd keep an open mind." Vivian's hands tightened around her own mug. Then why did you set up the date? Because I'm terrified. The admission came out raw, unfiltered. Constance's eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. I'm 68 years old, Vivian. I have high blood pressure. My mother died at 72, my sister at 75. I wake up every morning wondering if this is the day my body decides it's done. Vivian started to interrupt, but her mother held up one hand. Let me finish. I've been setting up these dates for 2 years because I'm terrified of dying and leaving you alone. Not alone because you don't have friends or colleagues or a successful business. Alone because you don't have someone who loves you. Someone who sees you first thing in the morning and last thing at night. Someone who will hold your hand when you're scared and celebrate with you when you succeed. Tears were sliding down Constance's face now, but her voice stayed steady. I know the men I've introduced you to weren't right. I knew it every time. But I kept trying because doing something felt better than accepting that you might spend the rest of your life alone because I failed to help you. The kitchen was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Vivian set her coffee down carefully, afraid her hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. Mom, I'm not your responsibility. I haven't been for a long time. You're always my responsibility. That's what being a mother means. It doesn't stop when you turn 18 or 30 or 46. It doesn't stop when you build a successful company or buy a penthouse or prove to the world that you're fine on your own. Constance wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a shaky breath. But Richard said something else when he called. Something that made me realize I've been going about this all wrong. What did he say? He said the man who interrupted your date looked at you like you were the only person in the room, like nothing else existed except you. And Richard said he'd been married twice, dated dozens of women, and he'd never looked at anyone like that. Never felt that kind of certainty about another human being. Vivian's throat tightened. He said, whoever that man was, I should stop wasting your time with setups and let you find your own path. Because whatever was between you and him was real, and everything else was just noise. The confession settled between them. Constance reached across the counter, took Vivian's hand. So tell me about Marcus Holloway, the real story, not the consultant version. Vivian looked at her mother's hand holding hers at the age spots and the wedding ring she still wore, even though Vivian's father had been gone for 30 years. Looked at the white rose in its vase on the counter. Made a choice. He defended me. When Richard was telling me I was too old, Marcus came over and gave me an out. Then he sat with me for an hour and listened while I told him about Jonathan, about the fertility treatments, about all of it. And he didn't flinch, didn't try to fix it or minimize it or tell me it would be okay. He just listened. And then he bought me a flower. Told me I deserved someone brave enough to be worthy of me, not just good enough. Constance smiled through her tears. When was the last time Jonathan looked at you like that? The question hit harder than it should have. Vivian thought back through 12 years of marriage, tried to remember a single moment when Jonathan had looked at her with the kind of certainty Marcus had shown on a snowy sidewalk after knowing her for 3 months in one conversation. Never, not even at the beginning. Then maybe Richard was right. Maybe I should stop trying to find you someone appropriate and let you find someone real. And they sat together in the kitchen, holding hands across the breakfast bar, while the morning light grew stronger outside the windows. Eventually, Constance pulled back, wiped her eyes one more time, tempted a laugh that came out watery but genuine. So, what happens on Friday? I don't know. The contract ends. Marcus said he'd ask me then. But Mom, it's complicated. He has a daughter, 7 years old. His ex-wife left them 3 years ago, moved to Seattle. He's a single father working 70-hour weeks and trying to figure out how to be enough for a child who deserves more than he thinks he can give. Constance stood up, started putting the uneaten pastries back in their bags. Sounds like he's exactly the kind of man who'd understand what you've been through. The kind who knows what it's like to feel inadequate and keep trying anyway. She looked at Vivian with something that might have been approval, might have been hope. Don't let fear make your decisions. I've watched you do that for 8 years. It kept you safe, but it didn't make you happy. After her mother left, Vivian stood in her kitchen and thought about fear, about the different shapes it took, about how easy it was to mistake protection for strength. She thought about Marcus sitting across from her in a coffee shop telling her about missing his daughter's first words because he was too busy trying to prove he was worth something, about the pale band of skin where his wedding ring used to be, about the way he'd looked at her like she was someone worth crossing a street in a snowstorm for. Her phone buzzed, an email, from the board chair marked urgent. Need to add an item to tomorrow's agenda. Phase 2 of CloudSafe. Sentinel's contract is up for renewal. Board wants your recommendation before we extend the offer. Vivian stared at the screen. Phase 2 was worth $450,000 over 6 months. Marcus's team was the best option by every objective measure. Recommending anyone else would be a disservice to the company. But recommending Sentinel meant 6 more months of professional boundaries, 6 more months of maintaining distance, 6 more months of Friday staying hypothetical instead of real. She typed a response. We'll have recommendation ready for tomorrow's meeting. Spent the rest of Wednesday trying to figure out what that recommendation would be. Thursday morning brought freezing rain that coated every surface in a layer of ice. Vivian left her building an hour early, drove 20 miles per hour on streets where cars slid through intersections despite their drivers' best efforts. Made it to the office by 7:45, 2 hours before the board meeting that would determine whether she chose her company's best interest or her own. The email arrived at 8:17. From Marcus. Subject line, Phase 2 decision. Vivian opened it with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't because she'd trained them not to over 8 years of board meetings and investor presentations and depositions where showing emotion was weakness. Ms. Caldwell, I'm writing to inform you that Sentinel Cybersecurity is withdrawing from consideration for the Phase 2 CloudSafe contract. My supervisor is not pleased with this decision, but I've cited a conflict of interest that makes it impossible for me to continue working with Tech Vanguard in a professional capacity. I hope you'll understand that this choice is not a reflection on your company or its leadership. It's simply a recognition that I can't be your consultant and ask you to dinner. I'm choosing dinner. If you'll still have me, Friday night, 7 p.m., Marcus. Vivian read it 3 times, then a 4th, then closed her laptop and sat in her office with ice pelting against the windows and thought about a man who just sacrificed a lucrative contract because he valued the possibility of something real more than professional advancement. The board meeting started at 10. 14 people around a conference table, coffee and pastries. Vivian hadn't touched presentations about Q4 results and projections for the coming year. The Phase 2 discussion came up at 10:47. The board chair, a man named Robert Thorne, who'd been with the company since its founding and owned enough shares to make his opinion matter, pulled up the contract details. Sentinel's done excellent work on Phase 1. Their team identified vulnerabilities our internal IT department missed. I think extending their contract is the obvious choice. Nods around the table. The CFO pulled up cost comparisons. They're also 30% less expensive than the next closest bid and have a better track record on delivery timelines. More nods. Vivian felt the moment crystallizing, felt the weight of what she was about to do, settling onto her shoulders like a physical thing. I'm recommending we go with a different firm for Phase 2. The room went silent. Robert looked at her with eyebrows raised. Can you explain why a conflict of interest has been identified? We need to maintain integrity in our vendor relationships. The CFO leaned forward. What kind of conflict? Vivian met his eyes, kept her voice level. Personal. That's all I'm prepared to say. Robert's expression shifted. Understanding dawning, followed by something that might have been respect. This is your decision to make, Vivian. You built this company. If you're telling us there's a conflict, we trust your judgment. One of the newer board members, a woman who joined 6 months ago after selling her own startup, spoke up. Just to be clear, you're willing to pass on the best option because of a personal conflict. I'm willing to maintain ethical standards even when it costs us something, yes. The board member nodded slowly. Admirable and rare. The vote was unanimous. Tech Vanguard would pursue the second best option for Phase 2. Robert stayed after the meeting ended, caught Vivian at the door. In 8 years, I've watched you put this company ahead of everything. Your health, your personal life, your happiness. If you're finally putting something else first, I hope it's worth it. Vivian thought about Marcus's email. about him choosing dinner over a $450,000 contract. I hope so too. Friday arrived with clear skies and temperatures that had finally climbed above freezing. The ice from Thursday melted into slush that splattered against car wheels and soaked through shoes of anyone who stepped in the wrong puddle. Vivian spent the day in back-to-back meetings watching the clock creep toward 5 p.m. like it was moving through honey instead of seconds. The Sentinel team finished the security patch at 4:30. Marcus sent a final project report at 4:45. At 4:57, their contract officially ended. At 5 p.m. exactly, Vivian's phone buzzed with a text. Still want to try this 7 tonight. I can pick you up or meet you somewhere. Your choice, M. Vivian typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that one too. Settled on something simple. My place. 7 works. She drove home through Friday evening traffic, changed into jeans and a cashmere sweater that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but looked effortless, like she hadn't spent 20 minutes choosing it. Put on minimal makeup. Let her hair down instead of pulling it back. Looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The white rose had started to wilt. Vivian touched one petal, felt it come away in her fingers, soft and fragile. She left the vase where it was anyway. A reminder of where this started. At 6:43, her doorbell rang. 17 minutes early. Vivian smiled despite the nerves trying to claw their way up her throat. Walked to the door, opened it, expecting Marcus alone. Found him standing there in jeans and a dark blue shirt, holding the hand of a small girl in Disney princess pajamas, who clutched a stuffed rabbit like it was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Marcus's face was apologetic, panicked, resigned all at once. I'm so sorry. Natasha's flight from Seattle got canceled. Weather delay. She was supposed to pick up Lily 2 hours ago for their weekend together. I've called every babysitter I know. Everyone's already booked for Friday night. I can't leave her alone. We'll have to reschedule. Vivian knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with the little girl who was half hiding behind Marcus's leg. Brown curls that caught the hallway light. Blue eyes that were her father's exactly. Small and scared and trying very hard to be brave. Hi, Lily. I'm Vivian. That's a beautiful rabbit. What's their name? Lily's voice came out barely above a whisper. Mr. Hopscotch. Mr. Hopscotch is a perfect name. I had a stuffed rabbit when I was your age. Her name was Cotton. Lily's eyes widened, slightly interest breaking through shyness. Where is Cotton now? I gave her to a children's hospital, so kids who were sick could have a friend with them. Lily thought about this, head tilted to one side. That was nice of you. Vivian stood up, looked at Marcus, made a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. Come in, both of you. We'll order pizza. Marcus's relief was palpable. You're sure this isn't what you signed up for? I'm sure, come on. It's freezing in the hallway. They came inside. Lily's eyes went wide at the penthouse, at the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the view of the city spread out below. Marcus set down a backpack Vivian hadn't noticed he was carrying, pulled out an iPad and charger juice boxes, a bag of goldfish crackers. Survival supplies, in case we got stuck somewhere. Vivian felt something warm in her chest watching this man who'd come prepared for every contingency, who'd packed snacks and entertainment for his daughter, because being a parent meant thinking 3 steps ahead at all times. What kind of pizza does Lily like? Marcus looked at his daughter. Cheese, always cheese. She's suspicious of toppings. Lily nodded solemnly. Toppings are tricky. Vivian pulled out her phone, found the number for Giordano's. 1 large cheese pizza, extra cheese, deep dish, 30 minutes. While they waited for food, Lily explored the penthouse with the careful curiosity of a child who'd been taught to be respectful of other people's spaces. She examined the bookshelves, ran her fingers along the spines without pulling anything out. Looked at the framed photographs on the mantel, mostly landscapes and architectural shots Vivian had bought because they matched the color scheme. You don't have any people pictures. Vivian hadn't thought about it before, but Lily was right. No family photos, no friends, just empty beauty that filled space without meaning anything. I guess I don't. Daddy has lots. They're all of me. Marcus looked embarrassed. I might have gone overboard with the camera when she was born. You have 700 pictures on your phone just from this year. That sounds about right. Lily wandered over to the windows, pressed her nose against the glass. The city lights were starting to come on as daylight faded, thousands of points of brightness spreading across the landscape. We're so high up. 45th floor. Can we see your building from here, Daddy? Marcus joined her at the window pointed northwest. Maybe. We're about 3 miles that direction. Lily looked between her father and Vivian, processing. Are you Daddy's girlfriend? The question hung in the air. Marcus opened his mouth to deflect, but Vivian got there first. I don't know yet. We're trying to figure that out. Lily seemed satisfied with this answer. The doorbell rang. Pizza. Vivian paid the delivery driver, brought the box to the coffee table, found paper plates and napkins. They ate sitting on the floor because Lily said it was more fun than the table, and Marcus didn't argue, and Vivian realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten sitting on the floor of her own living room. Lily talked between bites of pizza, about school, about her best friend Zara, who was moving to California over winter break, about the coding class she was taking on Saturdays, about wanting a real rabbit someday, but Daddy said they had to wait until she was older and could help take care of it properly. Daddy says responsibility is earned, not given. Marcus wiped pizza sauce off her face with a napkin. And I'm right. I know, but I still want a rabbit. When you're 10, we agreed. That's 3 whole years. I'm aware. Vivian watched them together, this easy rhythm. They had the back and forth that came from spending most of every day in each other's company. Watch the way Marcus was completely present with his daughter, the way he listened to everything she said like it mattered, like her opinions about rabbits and coding and moving friends were as important as any business deal or security protocol. After pizza, Lily got sleepy. The iPad came out, some animated movie about a girl with magical powers. She curled up on the couch with Mr. Hopscotch Marcus sitting beside her, one arm around her shoulders. Vivian sat in the chair across from them, watching the movie without really seeing it, too aware of the domestic scene playing out in her living room, too conscious of the ache building in her chest. This is what it could have been, if the IVF had worked, if Jonathan had stayed, if Vivian's body had cooperated with her plans for the future. This easy comfort of family, this sense of being needed and necessary and part of something larger than yourself. Halfway through the movie, Lily's eyes started to close. Marcus noticed, lifted her gently. Guest bedroom. Vivian showed him down the hall, pulled back the covers on the bed that had never been slept in, watched as Marcus tucked his daughter in with practiced movements. Lily mumbled something about Mr. Hopscotch. Marcus made sure the rabbit was secure in her arms. Sleep well, Bug. I'll be right outside if you need me. They left the door cracked open, walked back to the living room. Marcus collapsed onto the couch like someone who'd been holding tension in every muscle and finally had permission to let it go. I'm sorry, this wasn't the evening I had planned. Vivian sat beside him, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. What did you have planned? Dinner at a nice restaurant, conversation without interruptions. Maybe a walk by the lake if it wasn't too cold. Definitely not pizza on your living room floor with my 7-year-old as a chaperone. I liked it better than a restaurant. Marcus turned to look at her, really. Vivian thought about how to explain it. The watching him with Lily, the seeing him be completely himself without professional polish or careful boundaries. The witnessing something real instead of performance. I spent 12 years in a marriage where everything was planned, where spontaneity was scheduled and surprises were organized. This was real, messy and imperfect and real. Marcus's hand found hers on the couch between them. His fingers were warm, calloused, solid. Can I tell you something? Please. I've been thinking about tonight all week, about what I'd say, how I'd explain that I've been half in love with you since September, and that scares the hell out of me because I barely know you and I have Lily to think about and I can't afford to make mistakes that affect her. Vivian's breath caught. And then Natasha's flight got canceled and I showed up at your door with my daughter and I thought this was it. This was the moment you'd realize what a disaster getting involved with me would be. But you didn't run. You invited us in. You asked about Mr. Hopscotch. You sat on your living room floor and ate pizza like it was the most natural thing in the world. And watching you with Lily, he trailed off, seemed to be struggling with how to finish the sentence. I thought I'd made peace with not having children. Thought I'd accepted it and moved on. But tonight, watching you with her, watching her trust you enough to fall asleep in your guest room, I didn't know how much I'd been lying to myself about being okay with what I lost. The confession cost her something. Vivian felt tears threatening, pushed them back through sheer force of will. Marcus moved closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's real or if we're both just lonely enough to mistake possibility for certainty, but I want to find out. I want to try. Vivian leaned into his touch, felt the warmth of his palm against her cheek. So do I. They were inches apart, Marcus's eyes searching hers for permission, for confirmation, for something. Vivian started to close the distance between them. A sound from the hallway. Small feet on hardwood. Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, Mr. Hopscotch dragging on the floor. Daddy, I had a bad dream. Marcus pulled back immediately, went to his daughter, knelt down in front of her. What kind of bad dream? The school was on fire and I couldn't find you. He picked her up, settled her against his chest, even though she was getting too big to be carried easily. I'm right here. You're safe. Want me to sit with you until you fall asleep again? Lily nodded against his shoulder. Marcus looked at Vivian over his daughter's head, apology written in every line of his expression. Vivian stood up, walked over to them. I'll make hot chocolate. Sometimes that helps with bad dreams. Lily lifted her head. Really? Really, my mom used to make it for me when I was your age. She went to the kitchen, heated milk, added cocoa powder and sugar and vanilla. Poured it into a mug with cartoon characters on the side that she'd bought years ago for a reason she couldn't remember and never used. Brought it back to the guest bedroom, where Marcus sat on the edge of the bed with Lily curled against his side. Lily took the mug with both hands, sipped carefully. It's good. It's my mom's recipe. She says bad dreams can't survive hot chocolate. Is your mom magic? Maybe a little bit. Lily finished half the mug, handed it back to Vivian, settled deeper into the pillows. Marcus stayed where he was, one hand on his daughter's back, patient and steady and willing to sit there all night, if that's what she needed. Vivian left them there, went back to the living room, cleaned up the pizza box and paper plates. Checked her phone, 11:07. Past Lily's bedtime by hours. Past any reasonable hour for a first date that had turned into something else entirely. Marcus appeared 15 minutes later. She's out, really out this time. He sat on the couch, scrubbed both hands over his face. This is my life. This is what getting involved with me looks like. Last-minute cancellations and interrupted moments. And a 7-year-old who has nightmares about losing me because her mother already left once. Marcus, he looked up. I'm not scared of complicated. I'm scared of easy promises that fall apart when life gets real. She gestured toward the guest bedroom. This is real. Her phone buzzed. Text message. Marcus's phone buzzed half a second later. They both looked at their screens. Marcus's expression went carefully neutral in a way that meant something significant had just happened. Natasha, her flight got rerouted to O'Hare instead of Midway. She's landing in an hour. Wants to know if she can pick up Lily tomorrow instead of tonight. Another buzz, another message. She's asking if we can talk. Says her marriage is falling apart. Says she's been thinking about trying again. For Lily's sake. Vivian felt the floor tilt underneath her. Marcus was still looking at his phone, reading messages that were coming through rapid fire now. His ex-wife unloading 3 years of distance in text form. Finally, he set the phone down. Looked at Vivian. I need to figure this out before I drag you into my mess. The words hit like cold water. Professional. Distant. The door closing just as it had started to open. Vivian's phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus to her this time, even though he was sitting 5 feet away. Tonight was perfect. Lily already asked when she can see you again. But Natasha just called. She wants to talk about reconciliation. For Lily. I told her I'd think about it. I'm sorry. I need to figure this out before I drag you into my mess. Vivian stared at the message, felt something crumbling in her chest. The familiar pattern of hope, followed by withdrawal of possibility, colliding with reality. But then she thought about her mother's words. Don't let fear make your decisions. She typed a response. Don't think about it alone. Let's figure it out together. Lunch tomorrow. Sent it before she could second guess. Watched Marcus's phone light up. watched him read it, watched his expression shift from resignation to something that might have been relief. He typed back, "You sure this could get messy?" Vivian didn't hesitate. "I've spent 8 years playing it safe. I'm tired of safe. Let's try messy." Marcus looked at her across the 5 feet of expensive carpet and designer furniture that separated them, smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less burdened. Messy it is. Saturday morning brought sunshine that felt like a promise after a week of gray skies and freezing rain. Vivian met Marcus at Millennium Park at the small outdoor cafe that stayed open year-round despite the cold, because tourists wanted their coffee with a view of the bean, regardless of temperature. Marcus was already there when she arrived, 2 cups of coffee on the table in front of him, his coat buttoned against the wind that came off the lake like knives. He stood when he saw her, a reflex from somewhere deep in his upbringing, the kind of old-fashioned courtesy that most men had abandoned decades ago. They sat across from each other at a metal table that had frost on the edges where the sun hadn't reached yet. Around them, the park was nearly empty. A few joggers, a woman walking 3 dogs, the city rising up behind them like a fortress of steel and glass. Marcus wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Natasha gets in at 3 this afternoon. She texted me this morning. Wants to come by the apartment at 5. Talk about what comes next." Vivian sipped her coffee, felt the heat spread through her chest, but couldn't tell if it was the caffeine or the fear. What does she want? A second chance for Lily. She said her marriage in Seattle is over. Said she made a mistake choosing a fresh start over her daughter. Said she wants to try again. Build the family Lily deserves. The words came out flat, like Marcus was reading from a script he'd memorized but didn't believe. Vivian studied his face, looking for the truth underneath. "What do you want?" Marcus looked past her shoulder toward the skyline. "I want Lily to have both parents. I want her to grow up knowing her mother chose her. I want to give her every chance at normal that I can. That's what Lily needs. I asked what you want." The distinction made Marcus's jaw tighten. He brought his eyes back to Vivian's face. "I want to stop feeling like I failed. Like I worked so hard to prove I was worth something that I destroyed the one thing that actually mattered. I want to believe that going back could fix what I broke. But I'm not the same person who married Natasha. 9 years of marriage, 3 years of divorce, raising Lily mostly alone, it changed me. I can't go back to who I was. And she's not coming back because she loves me. She's coming back because her plan B didn't work out." The honesty was brutal. Vivian recognized the shape of it, the way people convinced themselves that sacrifice was the same as love, that doing the hard thing automatically made it the right thing. When you love someone, you don't leave them for a year and only come back when it's convenient. Marcus looked at her with something like gratitude. "That's what I keep telling myself. But then I think about Lily asking why she doesn't have a mom like her friends do. About her 7th birthday party, where she was the only kid whose mother didn't show up. About every school play and science fair and Ordinary Tuesday, where it's just been me. And you think Natasha coming back would fix that? I think it might." Vivian set her coffee down, leaned forward with her elbows on the cold metal table. "My turn for honesty. I'm terrified this conversation is you preparing me for goodbye. That you're going to hear Natasha out and decide that giving Lily her mother back is worth more than whatever this is between us." Marcus started to interrupt, but Vivian held up one hand. "Let me finish. My fear isn't that you'll go back to Natasha. It's deeper than that. I'm afraid of wanting this. Wanting you, wanting Lily, wanting a family. Because the last time I wanted that, it destroyed me. What if I'm not enough again? What if Lily needs her real mother and I'm just in the way?" The confession scraped against her throat on the way out. Marcus reached across the table, took her hand. "You need to know something. Natasha's coming to Chicago on Tuesday. I'll hear her out because I owe Lily that honesty. But I'm not going back to her. Not because of you, because of me. I'm not who I was when we got married, and she's not coming back because she loves me. She's coming back because she's scared and alone and looking for something familiar." Vivian's breath caught. "How can you be sure? Because when you love someone, you show up. You don't leave for a year and expect them to wait. You don't build a new life in another city and only remember your daughter when that life falls apart." The certainty in his voice steadied something in Vivian's chest. She turned her hand in his, laced their fingers together. So what do we do? How do we get through this? Marcus's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Honestly, we tell each other the truth. I'll talk to Natasha on Tuesday. You deal with whatever you need to deal with. We reconvene Wednesday and figure out what comes next. No disappearing, no matter what happens. No disappearing, even if it gets messy, even if it hurts, we show up. They sat in the cold December morning and made promises that felt both fragile and unbreakable. Around them, the city went about its business. The joggers circled back. The woman with 3 dogs disappeared down a path. The sun climbed higher, melting the frost on their table in slow patches. Eventually, Vivian pulled her hand back, finished her coffee. I need to talk to my mother. Really talk to her. Not about Richard or the setups or any of that. About why she's been so desperate to see me partnered off. When? Tomorrow, before I lose my nerve. Marcus came around to her side of the table, pulled her to her feet. They stood close enough that Vivian could feel his warmth through both their coats. He leaned down, pressed his forehead against hers. We can do this. Whatever happens, we can do this. Vivian wanted to believe him, chose to believe him, let herself lean into his certainty because her own was still too new, too tentative to carry the weight alone. They walked back through the park together, hands linked, breath clouding in the cold air. At her car, Marcus kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made Vivian's eyes sting. Wednesday, no matter what. Wednesday. Sunday morning found Vivian pacing her penthouse at 6 a.m., waiting for 7 when she told her mother to arrive. The white rose had wilted completely now, petals brown and papery, but Vivian kept it anyway. Evidence that things beautiful could be temporary and still matter. Constance arrived at 6:53 with pastries again, like food was the only way she knew how to show love. They sat at the breakfast bar, with coffee and croissants. Neither of them ate, and Vivian made herself ask the question she'd been avoiding for 2 years. Why are you so terrified of me being alone? Her mother's hands stilled around her coffee cup. Because I know what it comes, what you give up, what you lose. You've been alone for 30 years. Since Dad died, you survived. Survived isn't the same as lived. The distinction hung between them. Constance set her cup down, looked at her daughter with eyes that held 3 decades of accumulated loneliness. I was 44 when I had you. Everyone said I was too old. Doctors told me the pregnancy was high risk, that there were too many things that could go wrong. They recommended termination, said it was the sensible choice for a woman my age. Vivian had never heard this story. Her mother had always been open about the difficulties of older pregnancy, but never this. Never the recommendation to end it. Obviously, you didn't listen. I told them I'd waited my whole life for you, that I didn't care about risk or complications or what other people thought was sensible. I was going to have my baby, and that was final. Constance's voice had gone fierce, the same tone she used to use when Vivian was bullied in middle school, when teachers suggested she was too ambitious, when Jonathan first asked for a divorce. You were my miracle. And maybe that's why I push so hard now. Because I know what it's like to be told you're too old, too late, that the window has closed. And I don't want you to believe those lies the way I almost did. The confession settled into Vivian's chest, took root next to all the other truths she'd been avoiding. Her mother's pressure hadn't been disappointment. It had been projection. Fear that her daughter would face the same isolation she had, would make the same choices that led to 3 decades of sleeping alone. Mom, I'm not you. My path doesn't have to be yours. I know that, intellectually. But fear isn't intellectual. It's visceral. It's waking up at 3 a.m. and wondering what happens when I'm gone. Who takes care of you when you're sick? Who holds your hand when you're scared? Who celebrates with you when something wonderful happens? Tears were sliding down Constance's face now, but her voice stayed steady. I watch you build this incredible company, this amazing career, and I'm so proud I could burst. But I also see you coming home to an empty apartment every night. I see you eating dinner alone. I see you on holidays with nowhere to go except my house, and even then you leave early because being around family reminds you of what you don't have. The accuracy of the observation hit like a physical blow. Vivian had thought she'd been hiding it better, had thought the armor she wore was opaque enough that no one could see the hollowness underneath. Her mother reached across the counter, took her hands. So, yes, I've been desperate. I've been pushing you toward men who aren't right because I'm terrified of dying and leaving you completely alone. It was selfish and misguided, and I'm sorry. Vivian squeezed her mother's hands, felt the bones fragile underneath papery skin. There's something I need to tell you about the fertility treatments, about why they failed. Constance pulled back slightly, apprehension crossing her features. What about them? Vivian took a breath, let it out slowly. Do you remember Dr. Reeves, the specialist Jonathan and I worked with? Of course, he tried everything. You ran into him last year at a charity event. He was retired, talking openly about old cases. Understanding dawned in her mother's eyes. How did you know that? Because you told me last week. You said he mentioned my case, said the blocked fallopian tube was correctable with surgery, that Jonathan and I divorced before they could try that option. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Constance's face had gone pale. I didn't want to tell you. You seem to have made peace with it. I thought bringing it up would just reopen old wounds. Vivian felt something crack open in her chest, all the grief she'd been carrying for 8 years suddenly too big to contain. I could have had children. The marriage ended because of something that was fixable. I spent 8 years thinking I was broken, building my entire identity around that brokenness, and it was a lie. The tears came then, hot and bitter. Constance came around the counter, pulled her daughter into her arms the way she used to when Vivian was small and the world felt too big and sharp. You're not broken. You never were. The doctors were wrong. Jonathan was wrong. Everyone who made you feel like your value was tied to your reproductive system was wrong. Vivian sobbed against her mother's shoulder, 8 years of accumulated pain pouring out in waves. All the appointments she'd endured, the injections, the hope followed by crushing disappointment month after month, the slow erosion of her marriage as Jonathan looked at her with increasing distance, the divorce papers she'd signed because she believed she deserved to be left. What if I'd known? What if we tried the surgery? Would Jonathan have stayed? Would I have the life I was supposed to have? Her mother pulled back, held Vivian's face between both hands. The life you were supposed to have is the one you're living, not some alternate version where Jonathan stayed and you had children and everything was perfect. This life, the one where you built a company from nothing, where you became someone powerful and brilliant and strong, where you met Marcus. The name shifted something in Vivian's chest. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know if Marcus and I have a future. His ex-wife wants to reconcile for their daughter. What does Marcus want? He says he wants me, but he also wants to do right by Lily, and I don't know if those two things can coexist. Constance brushed a strand of hair back from Vivian's face, tucked it behind her ear with a mother's automatic tenderness. Then you wait. You see what happens on Tuesday when he talks to his ex-wife. And you trust that a man who looked at you like you were the only person in the room isn't going to suddenly stop seeing you. What if I'm not enough? What if Lily needs her real mother? Sweetheart, being a mother isn't about biology. It's about showing up. And from what you've told me, you showed up for that little girl on Friday night. You made her hot chocolate and sat with her father until she fell asleep feeling safe. That's what matters. The words settled into Vivian like stones in a foundation, building something solid where there had only been emptiness before. They spent the rest of Sunday together, mother and daughter, talking about everything and nothing. About Vivian's father, who'd been dead for 30 years, but whose absence still shaped Constance's life. About the choices people make and the ones that get made for them. About fear and courage and the thin line between protecting yourself and walling yourself off from anything good. By the time Constance left, the afternoon sun was slanting through the windows in long golden bars. Vivian stood at her window and watched her mother's car pull out of the parking garage, watched it join the stream of Sunday traffic heading north. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. Natasha's flight landed. She'll be at my place tomorrow at 5. I'm terrified and certain in equal measure. How did things go with your mom? Vivian typed back. Hard but necessary. She told me things I needed to hear. How's Lily? Missing you. Asked when she can see you again. Told her maybe Wednesday. Hope that's still the plan. It's still the plan. Whatever happens tomorrow, we show up Wednesday. Whatever happens. I promise. Tuesday arrived with clouds that threatened snow but never delivered. Vivian went to the office, tried to focus on work, failed spectacularly. Left at 3 and went home to pace her penthouse like a caged animal, checking her phone every 5 minutes. Even though Marcus had said he'd call after Natasha left, even though that probably wouldn't be until late evening. At 7:30, her phone rang. Not Marcus. A number she didn't recognize with a Seattle area code. She answered anyway. Ms. Caldwell, this is Natasha Brennan, Marcus's ex-wife. I'm in Chicago. We need to talk. Vivian's heart stopped, restarted, hammered against her ribs. About what? About you and Marcus. About my daughter. About what happens next. The line went quiet, except for breathing on both ends. Then Natasha's voice came back different now. Less aggressive, more resigned. I'm at Marcus's apartment. He told me to call you. Said you should be part of this conversation since it affects you too. Vivian looked at the clock, 7:37. Looked at her reflection in the dark window, hair pulled back, face bare of makeup, wearing jeans and a sweater that had been comfortable an hour ago, but now felt like a costume. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She grabbed her coat and keys, drove through evening traffic with her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Marcus's apartment was in Logan Square, a third-floor walk-up in a building that had been renovated sometime in the 90s and hadn't been touched since. Vivian climbed the stairs, found the door marked 3C, knocked. Marcus answered. His face was drawn tired, but his eyes held something steady underneath. Thank you for coming. He stepped aside. Vivian walked into a space that was unmistakably a home built around a child. Lily's drawings on the refrigerator, a backpack by the door, toys in a basket under the window. The apartment was small but clean, organized in the way of someone who'd learned to keep chaos at bay through strict routine. Natasha Brennan sat on the couch, a glass of water in her hand. She was smaller than Vivian expected, red hair, cut in a bob, wearing jeans and a sweater that looked expensive but rumpled. Her eyes were Marcus's exact shade of blue, which made sense given Lily had inherited them. She stood when Vivian entered, extended a hand. Thank you for coming. I know this is awkward. Vivian shook her hand, felt the strength in Natasha's grip. Where's Lily? Marcus gestured toward the hallway. Her room, playing. I told her to stay there while the adults talked. The three of them stood in the small living room triangle of tension drawn tight between them. Natasha sat back down. Marcus stayed standing. Vivian took the chair across from the couch, perched on the edge, like she might need to run. Natasha took a breath, let it out slowly. I came here thinking I could fix this, that I could come back to Chicago, rebuild my family, give Lily what she deserves. I had a whole speech prepared about second chances and learning from mistakes. She looked at Marcus. But you were right. We're not the same people we were. And I'm not here because I love you. I'm here because I'm scared and my backup plan fell apart and Chicago felt safer than staying in Seattle alone. The honesty was startling. Vivian watched Marcus's face, saw relief and sadness war for dominance. I can still be a better mother. I can move back, take the VP position I was offered at a firm downtown. See Lily more than once a month. But us, she shook her head. We're done. You were right about that too. Marcus sat down on the couch, leaving careful distance between himself and his ex-wife. Lily needs you in her life, not as much as she needed you 3 years ago, but still. She asks about you. Wonders why you don't call more. Having you in Chicago would be good for her. Natasha's eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I left. I chose my own pain over being present for my daughter. But I want to try to be better. Starting now. A sound from the hallway. Small feet running. Lily appeared in the doorway, Mr. Hopscotch under one arm, eyes going wide when she saw Vivian. You came? She ran across the room, threw herself at Vivian with the abandon of a child who hadn't yet learned to guard her affections. Vivian caught her, felt small arms wrap around her neck, felt something in her chest expand and contract simultaneously. Hi, Bug. Your dad said you might want to see me. Lily pulled back, looked at her father, then her mother, then back to Vivian. Are you staying? Daddy said maybe you could stay for dinner. Natasha watched her daughter's instant comfort with Vivian, watched the way Lily kept one hand on Vivian's arm, like she was afraid she might disappear. Something shifted in Natasha's expression. Recognition, acceptance, maybe grief. She stood up. Actually, I need to go. My hotel is downtown and I have an early meeting tomorrow about the VP position. Lily finally seemed to notice her mother. You're leaving already. You just got here. Natasha knelt down, brought herself to eye level with her daughter. I'm taking a job in Chicago. I'll be here all the time starting next month. We'll have lots of dinners together. But right now, I think your dad and Vivian need to talk. She looked at Vivian over Lily's head. Take care of them. Both of them. They deserve someone who shows up. Before Vivian could respond, Natasha stood, grabbed her coat from the rack by the door, left the apartment with movements that spoke of barely controlled emotion. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Lily looked between her father and Vivian, processing. Is Vivian your girlfriend now? Marcus pulled his daughter onto his lap. Maybe. We're figuring it out. Is that okay with you? Lily thought about this seriously, her face scrunched in concentration. She makes you smile, and she's nice, and she makes good hot chocolate. Those are pretty solid credentials. I think you should keep her. Vivian felt tears threatening, pushed them back through sheer force of will. Marcus reached across the space between them, took her hand. What do you think want to be kept? The question was light, but the undercurrent was serious, real. Everything they'd been dancing around for a week condensed into this moment in a small apartment in Logan Square with a 7-year-old as witness. I think I'd like to try. Lily beamed. Can we have pizza to celebrate? Marcus laughed, the sound startled out of him by the abrupt shift to practical concerns. We just had pizza Friday. But that was regular pizza. This is celebration pizza. It's different. How is it different? Because we're happy. The logic was unassailable. Marcus looked at Vivian. You up for more Giordano's? As long as I don't have to sit on the floor this time. Deal. Wednesday evening found Vivian back at Marcus's apartment, this time with an overnight bag, because Lily had asked if she could stay, and Marcus had looked at Vivian with hope in his eyes, and saying no felt impossible. They'd spent the day separately. Vivian at work, Marcus troubleshooting a security issue for a new client, Lily at school learning about the solar system and presenting a poster about Jupiter that had earned her a gold star. Normal life reasserting itself after the chaos of the past week. But now, with Lily asleep in her room and the apartment quiet around them, Marcus and Vivian sat on the couch and finally had the conversation they'd been building toward. I need to tell you something about the fertility treatments. Vivian explained what her mother had revealed, the correctable condition, the surgery they'd never tried, the 8 years she'd spent believing she was fundamentally broken, when the truth was more complicated, less final. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he took both her hands in his. If you could go back, if you could have that surgery, save your marriage, have the children you wanted, would you? The question hung in the air between them. Vivian thought about Jonathan, about the man who'd left when things got hard, about the life she might have had if her body had cooperated. No, the answer came faster than she expected, because that path led me here. To you, to Lily, to believing I could have this. And I wouldn't trade this possibility for that certainty. Marcus pulled her closer until she was tucked against his side, his arm around her shoulders. Natasha called me this morning, said watching Lily with you made her realize she'd been competing with the wrong thing, that she couldn't compete with someone who genuinely saw her daughter and wanted to be there. What did you say? I said I wasn't asking Lily to choose, that she could have both her mother and you in her life, that one doesn't cancel out the other. Vivian thought about that, about being part of something instead of trying to replace it. I don't know how to be a stepmother. I don't know what that looks like or how to do it right. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Eventually, Marcus shifted position, reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. Vivian's heart stopped. I'm not proposing. Not yet. But I wanted to give you something. He opened the box. Inside was a silver bracelet with 3 charms. A rose, a laptop, a small rabbit. The rose is for the night we met. The laptop is for the professional excuse that brought us together. The rabbit is for Mr. Hopscotch because Lily insisted you needed to match her somehow. Vivian felt tears slip down her face as Marcus fastened the bracelet around her wrist. It's perfect. You're perfect. I'm really not. You're perfectly imperfect, which is the only kind of perfect worth having. Vivian kissed him, then slow and certain, tasting salt from her own tears and coffee from early Arctur, and something that might have been hope. They broke apart when they heard a sound from the hallway, while Lily padding toward them in pajamas covered in stars. Can't sleep. Too excited. Marcus lifted his daughter onto the couch between them. What are you excited about? Vivian's staying over and Mom's moving to Chicago and you're smiling again. She settled against her father's chest, one hand reaching out to grab Vivian's. This is nice. All of us together. Vivian looked at the small hand in hers at Marcus's face over his daughter's head, at this moment that was messy and imperfect and exactly what she'd spent 8 years believing she couldn't have. Yeah, it is. They stayed like that until Lily fell asleep again. Then Marcus carried her back to bed while Vivian tidied the living room in small ways, picking up toys and straightening cushions, making herself useful in this space that wasn't hers, but might be someday. Marcus returned, pulled her into his arms. I have something for you too, a gift. He led her to the small desk in the corner, opened a drawer, pulled out an envelope. Vivian opened it, found documents inside. Lease agreement for a 2-bedroom apartment 2 floors below her penthouse. Papers showing she'd paid first and last month's rent plus security deposit. I don't understand. I bought the lease, put it in my name, gave notice on this place. If we're doing this, I want to do it right. Slowly. You and your penthouse, me and Lily 2 floors down. Close enough to build something, but separate enough that we're not rushing. Vivian stared at the papers at the proof that this was real, that Marcus was planning for a future that included her. When did you do this? Monday. After we talked at Millennium Park. Before I knew what would happen with Natasha. Because I knew what I wanted, regardless of what she decided. The certainty in his voice steadied something in Vivian's chest. She set the papers down, turned to face him fully. I bought the condo 2 floors down from my place last week. 3 bedrooms, room for Lily, room for us. I was going to surprise you with it tonight. Marcus's laugh was startled, delighted. We both had the same idea. Apparently, we're both planners. Apparently, we're both all in. They stood in his small living room, holding each other, making plans for a future that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Eventually, Marcus led her to the guest room, showed her where everything was kissed, her goodnight with promises of breakfast together in the morning. Vivian lay in the unfamiliar bed and thought about how her life had changed in less than 2 weeks. How one intervention in a coffee shop had led to this. How all the years of believing she was too old, too broken, too late had been wrong. She wasn't too old. She was exactly the right age to recognize something real when it found her. 2 months later, on Valentine's Day, Vivian stood in her penthouse kitchen and watched snow fall outside the windows. Marcus and Lily were due any minute. The white rose had long since been replaced by fresh flowers, but Vivian kept the original vase, dried petals pressed between the pages of a book, proof that beautiful things could be temporary and still matter. The doorbell rang at 6:58. Vivian opened it to find Lily holding a construction paper card she'd made at school, Marcus standing behind her with a small box in his hands. They came inside. Lily presented her card with ceremony. Vivian opened it, found a drawing of 3 people holding hands, labeled in careful 7-year-old printing, Lily plus Daddy plus Vivian. Her heart cracked open and healed simultaneously. Dinner was pasta because Lily had declared herself tired of pizza. They ate at the table this time, Lily chattering about school, and her new friend Zara, who'd moved back from California after her parents changed their minds. About Natasha taking her ice skating last weekend, about the coding class she was taking on Saturdays, about the rabbit she still wanted, but understood she had to wait for. After Lily fell asleep in the guest room that was slowly becoming hers, Marcus and Vivian stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. He handed her the small box. Inside was the bracelet, but now it had additional charms. A key, a star, a heart. The key is for your place, the one you gave me last month. The star is for Lily. The heart is for you. Vivian felt tears threaten, blinked them back. I have something for you too. She led him inside, pulled an envelope from the drawer in her desk. Marcus opened it, found documents inside. The deed to the condo, 2 floors down, the renovation plans, the timeline showing completion in April. I'm not asking you to move in. Not yet. But this is me saying I'm all in. This isn't a trial. This is me choosing you, choosing us, choosing this messy, complicated, beautiful thing we're building. Marcus set the papers down, pulled her into his arms. I love you. I should have said it weeks ago, but I was scared and stupid and trying to protect myself from the possibility of this not working. I love you too. I'm still terrified, still convinced something will go wrong. But I'm choosing to try anyway. They kissed then finally without interruptions or hovering children or crises to manage. Long and slow and certain. When they pulled apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. Think we can do this. Vivian thought about Lily asleep in the next room, about Natasha co-parenting better now that she lived in Chicago, about her mother calling twice a week to check in, offering to babysit, slowly building a relationship with the granddaughter she'd never expected to have, about Tech Vanguard thriving under leadership that had finally learned to balance work with life. I think we're already doing it. They checked on Lily before bed, stood in the doorway watching her sleep with Mr. Hopscotch tucked under one arm. Marcus put his arm around Vivian's shoulders. Thank you for taking a chance on us. Thank you for being brave enough to ask. Later, lying in bed with Marcus asleep beside her, Vivian thought about the white rose, about how it had wilted after a week, but the memory of receiving it stayed fresh, about how some things were temporary and some things lasted, and the trick was knowing which was which. She'd spent 8 years believing she was too old for love, too broken, too late, but she'd been wrong. She wasn't too old. She was exactly the right age to recognize something real when it found her. And Marcus Holloway, with his complicated past and his brilliant daughter and his patient heart, had found her. Not to fix her, not to complete her, but to see her. And that made all the difference. The snow continued falling outside. The city slept under its white blanket. And Vivian Caldwell finally understood what her mother had been trying to tell her all along. Sometimes people don't leave because you're not enough. They leave because they're not brave enough to stay. And sometimes the right person comes along at exactly the moment you've stopped looking, carrying a white rose from a drugstore and the courage to see you for exactly who you are. Perfect. Not despite the flaws, but because of them. Because real and honest and strong enough to keep trying is the only kind of perfect worth having.